Well, let's return now to the developments on the Grenfell Tower fire. It's 3 weeks today since the blaze, and hundreds of residents are still living in emergency accommodation after some refusing offers of temporary housing. The authority responsible says 139 places have been found and offered to displaced residents, but only 14 of those have been accepted. Well, Andrew Teacher is a property expert and managing director at Blackstock Consulting, and he's with me now. Why do you think these offers are being made and the residents aren't taking them up?
I mean, I think what's clear is that there's just been an absolutely huge level of incompetence from the local council, and what we've seen really is just a really slow response from everyone that's now at last being taken control of by Sajid Javid, the community secretary, who announced this task force yesterday that's supposedly now going to take control of some of this. And I think what's clear is that you've got many dozens of families have got their own needs and their own situations that need personal assistance and personal support through such a troubling time. And
it needs to be a sort of individualised process, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not, you know, and what certainly the reports from some of the families that you've been carrying and other media outlets have been carrying just seem that actually what they've been given is a bunch of jobs worths with forms of getting them to fill stuff in, and that's clearly not how these sorts of things should be done. And what this really shows up is the utter incompetence, not just of Kensington and Chelsea Council, but the need for a huge rethink on how local politics is conducted in this country. And thinking London as one city, it's got 33 boroughs. Now, why do we need 33 local authorities across one city? New York has 5. It has broadly the same population, similar demographic makeup. It doesn't make any sense, and that's why when situations like this arise, or we've seen things in the past in the Haringey Council in North East London that had massive issues around child safety some years back, these authorities again and again, whether they're Tory, whether they're Labour, it doesn't make any difference. They need to have proper resources, and we need to really have a rethink about how these things are provided for.
I mean, in terms of social housing, we know that there isn't enough social housing in the UK, and that we have a problem with getting enough houses built. But, I mean, do these properties actually exist? You know, 120 families need rehousing. Is it possible to rehouse 120 families just like that in a borough the size of Kensington and Chelsea?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know the situations of those individual families involved. You're right, we do obviously have a social housing crisis, but look, this is a council that has run social housing at a surplus over the last few years, and that in plain English means they've been making profit from the rent versus the expense of providing social housing in the borough. So they've been squirreling away cash, which they could now use, and what they'll have to do is purchase these homes off of the private market, and you're right, they don't exist. But that's really a function of decades of politicians playing political football with housing. Everything from the right to buy in the 80s, where we sold off all the council housing, didn't replace it, through to help to buy, that's basically been given a huge tax break to house builders. And none of the political solutions that we've seen, whether these Tory tax breaks for housing developers or these balmy Labour ideas around rent caps that would send investors running a million miles away, none of these solutions are practical. And what we need to do is, as I've said before, take politics out of it and think about housing in the round, so that we're not simply saying, right, you know, we're going to build these blocks of housing for poor people over here and we're going to do these things over here. And when we're having a debate as we are today around public pay for firemen, for doctors, for teachers, for nurses, you know, all of these people are crucial to the development and economic growth and just society at large, not just in cities but right across the country. These are people that need to be housed. These are people that need to be taught at university to come out without debt strangling. And these are all issues that need to be considered in the round.
But fundamentally, isn't the issue that we just need to build more houses? We need
to
build more social housing.
It's not just simply about building it. It's about thinking about how these things are funded and how they are developed alongside everything else. Because I think what we've done over the years is we've built housing for the poor, and we said you're going to live over there, and that's why we end up with ghettos. And what we need to have are mixed communities where people live side by side that break down.
And we do have built, you know, a lot of buildings that they incorporate social housing into the building, but we do know that often means a separate entrance, a separate lift, smaller flat sizes when you're in there. So although on paper, social housing and private housing is in the same block, in reality, they're not really.
And I think the problem is that people routinely blame developers for that. And the reality is that lots of people in this country don't want to live near social housing. Lots of people in this country bang on about, yeah, we need to build more homes for their kids, but the minute a planning application turns up in their little posh market town, they go, oh no, we can't have that. And I think that's a massive level of hypocrisy where housing is concerned on every single level. And there are many issues that aren't going to get broken down in the course of this short interview, or even in the case of what's being discussed around Grenfell. But this needs to be a milestone, not just in how we deal with fire safety and how we think about cladding, but also in how we think about social housing. And that will need to have with it a major conversation, not just around local politics, but also potentially around council tax, around how we tax development, and how we actually incentivise and get more development to be mixed and to be much more inclusive than it has been over the previous few decades.
I mean, do you think this is something that's changed over the years? Because I look back to the 70s, my family living in council housing in the northeast, and it was certainly not a ghettoised area at all. It was a really lovely area where everybody was very proud of their front gardens. It was well kept, it was well loved, it was just part of the town. Why do you think that's changed?
I think it's changed because cities, particularly like London and Manchester, become more crowded. And as we've sold off a lot of the stuff that was council owned from the 70s and 80s, it's gone into private hands. And Right to Buy, when that was launched, it was launched as a way to essentially buy votes. And what that enabled people to do is that if you were living in a council house, you had a hugely subsidised opportunity to buy a property, and then many people just sold them on right away, trousered the profits. And that meant, because nothing more was built, relatively speaking, that it meant that stock had moved from public ownership into the private hands. And as time has gone by, successive governments of all colours, and this isn't a political thing at all, it's all governments have failed us here. What has happened is that stuff hasn't been built. And I think the problem is that governments routinely try and then blame developers. They say, oh, the greedy developers are at fault. But actually, when you look at the so-called greedy developers, they're pretty much building what they have been for the last few decades. Social housing is something that the government needs to provide for. And I think if we're going to do it in a meaningful way and we're going to address some of these issues, then we need to ask bigger questions around what councils do, how many we need, how we tax people, how we incentivise key workers, and how we, if we're going to say that we need teachers, we need doctors, we need firemen, we need nurses, we need to think more about how they're going to live, how they're going to be taxed, and do it in a far more fair way than we have been.
Andrew Teacher, interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much.